So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and I know that I said in the recent channel update that I would be trying to sort of return to a graphical quality that I had experienced in the past, but I decided to take my life into my hands somewhat with regards to that and try a night battle, which is notoriously difficult to try and get things to work without, either making it so you can't see anything or making it so that everything's a bit washed out. Now I think I've found as good a balance as I'm going to get for a night battle. I've turned the brightness up as much as I can without washing out the colours too much. I've turned up the saturation on reshade to try and make that work well as well. This is a 4v4 as well on Mountain Pass, so it promises to be quite a large battle. Interestingly enough as well, I won't be able to see the amount of frames remaining for the most part in the battle, because here, when it's up against a surface like this, it's fine, but if you send it into an area like that, it disappears entirely. So for the most part, we're going to be flying blind with regards to that, and I wanted to do a night battle because I've only ever done one before, and there is a certain mystique to a battle under the stars, and yeah, the fact that it's also a 4v4 also bodes quite well, but I have a good idea of where the fighting is going to start first of all, at least split between two fronts. Mountain Pass, of course, is quite an extensive map, but it does also bottle the armies together to a certain extent. Starting off with this passageway over here, so we'll go through the blue team first of all, and then we will go through the red team. Now this is an army which is very bunched together because I think they want to move to the aid of their ally as quickly as possible. This is Exlomp, who is playing as Gondor, and he's got some Pinnith Gelin cavalry over here. Now this could be useful, potentially. When the battle really gets going, it will probably be quite a grind fest in the middle of sort of some of the passes, but shock cavalry like this could be useful if it manages to escape into more open terrain, which there is parts of Mountain Pass which are more open, of course down in that bottom left hand corner, but for the most part everything else is going to be pretty standard fare for Gondor. They've got some axemen of Lasarnak, so a bit of extra AP there, which is always nice to see, but they've got some standard archers as well, some Fountain Guard. Of course, most Gondor armies are always going to have the Fountain Guard because they're such a good centre. We've also got the Caer Andros Swordmasters. We've got some Ramus Ekor Garrison Archers, which are a very, very good militia to your archer because they are able to absorb quite a lot of arrow fire and get good value for money. It is worth saying as well that I think the unit scaling is on medium so as to prevent a little bit of lag, which is good. A couple of units of Citadel Guard, of course, AP Spears, which are a rare breed indeed, especially ones as good as the Citadel Guard. There's also the Guards of Osgiliath, so a lot of polearms here. There's also Palagir Marines and a catapult, so not a standard Gondorian army with regards to the infantry. There's not really any standard Gondor infantry or spears to be had in huge numbers, and in this sort of battle I think that's okay. I think having a good skirmish force and enough polearms to hold the front line with artillery will potentially stand them in pretty good stead. Now the player who sent me the replay, let's head up onto this ridge to see his first hidden unit. This is Lucky Hussar, who's playing as Cardlin. Some Dunedain Rangers in a very nice position provided the red team advances into them, but we shall see. Moving into a somewhat darker part of the map. I do hope that it isn't too dark after YouTube has its way with the quality of the video. We have some Minas Tirith spearmen, which are of course sort of standard fare spears. Good enough front line. They've got some decent mass to them as well. We've also got some Greenwatch Garrison Archers over here, which are the Cardlin Militia Archers. Now there are more of them than the Ramus Ekor Garrison Archers, but individually they are weaker. So interesting to see how that works out. We've got some civilians as well. Moving further back, the torchlight is illuminating some Minas Tirith sharpshooters, of course, with Cardlin. Generally speaking, they're always going to have at least one, normally two, units of crossbows, depending on what the situation requires, because it is a real strength of theirs. We've got some Dunedain commanders, some Tharbad riders, and some Merc cavalry. So a lot of cavalry, considering that this is going to be quite a bottleneck situation for Cardlin. Some Dunedain captains over here as well, which is the General's Bodyguard, and they do have their plate armour upgrade as well, which is good to see. Moving further down, we have some Tharbad Warhammers as well as some Erenvorn Axemen, so again some lower tier axes here for some additional AP, more Axemen and some more Spears as well, so a pretty balanced army this. Not an awful lot in terms of archers here, but fortunately Gondor seems to have that covered because Gondor is immediately going to be reinforcing them. Going up here, it'll be interesting to see what this blue army up here does. We have Alpha Zero playing as Arthur Dane. We've got some Fornost Array Knights, 2 units of, and some Arthur Dane Sergeants over there. The cavalry probably wants to move to the aid of their other allies. I wouldn't send them into the bottleneck down there, but we'll see. We've got some Royal Court of House Armlaith, which is going to be the Arthedain General, so some multiple HP Lancers there. And the rest here we have some Arthedain Marksmen, some Dunedain Peacekeepers. It looks like the majority of Arthedain's infantry force is going to be heading to assist their other ally, and they will need it, I think, whoever they may be. Some Dismounted Knights of Anunas, which are of course a very, very strong unit indeed. I have disabled shadows as well, because that was the only way to make it work. It actually looks kind of daytime with this level of brightness, but I promise you it is nighttime. If I turn the brightness down, that will become immediately apparent. Some Arthedain Men-at-Arms, some Evendim Spears, and some Fornoster Rain Defenders. An interesting unit, very low attack scores, but tough spears, maybe a little bit maybe a little bit less cost effective than Gondor Spears with their full plate armour, but regardless. On we move to the final blue team army out here in the open field. They need to be careful they don't get overwhelmed. They do have a unit up here on the hillside. Nope, it's just a hidden unit. We have Lothlorien played by Frishjuice, some Sindar Blade Masters hidden there. And then the rest of their army, we've got some Lorien Archers, or some Lothlorien Archers here at the front. Very good unit, but they do need to be backed up because there aren't really enough of them to engage in a skirmish fight. Although, on lower unit scaling, units like this can engage in skirmish fights a little bit more easily because the discrepancy between the numbers between sort of militia units and elite units is sort of squished down a little bit. Some Sindar Archers who are dual wielders in melee, and they do have some benefits over the Galathrim Nobles. I can't quite remember all of them for now, but I do believe they have more ammunition, for one. Some Lothlorien Warriors, so some more AP on this team. Maetha Ilaz Gellan, some AP missiles. Now Lothlorien, being in the open field, is probably not what the elves would have wanted ideally, because they are more susceptible to being overwhelmed, potentially. But the Sylvan Spears are a good front line to try and counteract that a little bit. And some Sword Masters as a secondary line as well, very powerful. More Lothlorien Warriors back here, some Galathrim Nobles, so both the high tier archers are on display, and the Galathrim Riders, so an elite army over here, so they will have to be quite defensive, I think. I don't think, well actually, come to think of it, they could try and retreat around here if they really wanted to, and try and reinforce their allies from behind. That would be a fascinating move if he did do that, but based on the length of the battle, I somewhat doubt it. Now, the red team, starting off with Ailamal, with playing as Rohan. We've got Sons of Yore, so some Knights, potentially very useful of course. Some Westmark Marshals over here as well, some Hornburg Sentries and Medusal Guards, that's the elite corps. And I imagine the rest of his army is hidden within the trees, because that can't be all of it. And this, I believe, is his ally, indeed it is, Rudar, played by General WVPM. And pretty standard fare looking here for Rudar. They've got a lot of Rudar clansmen. The Hranadine Pikemen, which could potentially be really useful if they can get into a sustained fight with the elves front on. Hranadine Berserkers, which need to be a little bit careful. Their AP won't help them too much against Lothlorien, at least not as much as you'd hope. There's also some Dunman Spearmen to pad out the line. Oh no, here's the Rohan army. I'm actually legally blind, who knew that? So we have some First Marshal's Bodyguard, which is not where the General's at, but still another multiple HP Cav unit. Some Eowyn's Shield Maidens, as well as Westmark Infantry. Interesting to see them. Good to see them. Some Westmark Spears as well, so a mostly high tier army from Rohan. They've also brought the Helmingas instead of the lower, well they have got some Riddermark Archers, but they've mostly gone for the Helmingas. There might be a few hidden units around here as well. Now, the central red team, which this player's going to have to be careful, otherwise they could end up being overwhelmed by Cardolan and Gondor. We have Master Blaster playing as Dol Amroth, so he's got himself into loose formation, which is a good move, but he's going to need reinforcements from his red ally further down that valley in the background, so he's got some Doran Ernil archers at the front. They won't actually trade cost effectively with Gondor's archers in this situation, I don't think, but again, having a ranged presence is always important regardless. Tarnostian Guard, similar story with these guys as it is with the Fornoster Rain Defenders. They've got very low attack, as most standard spears tend to be honest. But they're pretty good line holders, and they might need to be based on the amount of numbers that could be heading towards them. Some pikes, some civilians, all in loose formation to prevent being skirmished. And then just in behind we've got some Ethelond Men-at-Arms and some Black Swan Vanguard. Now this AP will be very handy against Cardolan and Gondor, they'll need it badly. There's bound to be some hidden units around here as well, as almost certainly Nimrodel Rangers hidden around here somewhere. But not much else in the way of cav, it must be said. Now, there probably is some units hidden in these trees up here, which is probably where some more skirmish power lies. And then, the final army, before we can finally get into it, my word, the frame rate, even on a map that isn't made by WK and it being horrendously complicated and a machine killer, we have Bacon 122446 playing as Mordor, the upgraded Temple Executioners leading the way, probably the most fearsome single infantry that we will see on the battlefield today. A catapult as well, good to answer Gondor's, and then there is a whole mess of orcs, which I'm not even going to try and get all of them here, but we have some Morannon heavy maulers, we've probably got some orc band in here as well, Morannon infantry, Morannon halberds, all of the Morannon stuff, and of course some standard orc archers in there as well. Mostly a quantity approach, which could be very, very useful as things develop. Now, let's begin. 27,000 frames is honestly not a hugely long battle for a 4v4. Now I hope the frame rate is going to cooperate with me here, but again on a 4v4 when I am using reshade, that is, as I said, somewhat of a variable. Dora and Arch, you can see Gondor already pouring down through the valley, and actually if I were Cardlin and Gondor I would try to attack as quickly as possible into Dol Amroth, because yes, they probably do have some pretty nasty skirmishers hidden up here and probably some infantry support as well, but this force here is not going to be sufficient to withstand a direct assault, and indeed it would crumble pretty quickly, and that would be a lot of assets down the drain for the red team right off the bat. But Gondor are moving forward with all possible dispatch. Doesn't look like Cardlin are too eager to move forward at the time being, probably hoping that their Dunedain Ranger position will grant them some strength, but yeah, I think as soon as Mordor get on scene, they and Dol Amroth are probably going to attack forwards, and then they will be reliant on Dol Amroth, well, Gondor skirmishers I should say, to try and effect some casualties there. Galathrun Riders, they are multiple HP, so one volley won't do huge amounts of damage to them, but they do need to be careful because on their lonesome they are not going to be able to withstand too much in the way of volleys from Rudauer and Rohan's forces. Indeed, Rohan are moving forward very, very quickly. And yeah, the Horse Archers targeting the Rohan infantry as it comes forward, but Rohan won't really mind the Westmark Spearmen absorbing some of these casualties over here. What is going on here? Hello. Dol Amroth have a force up here. That was something I completely missed, I must be blind. But interestingly enough, Arthedain are going to be able to pretty easily deal with this. I mean, there are Haven Guard and Belfalas Marines up here. The Tirith Airborns and the Ethelon Halberdiers will be able to hold for a while, but ultimately I don't think that's going to work out too well. I mean, the Trebuchet could well get some horrendous casualties on Gondor as they advance through this very narrow choke point, like fish in a barrel almost. But I can't imagine that Trebuchet is going to last too long, so very high risk strategy there by putting that Trebuchet up there, because Arthedain are going to swallow that up fairly quickly, you'd imagine. Pinnithgalen cavalry moving. Now Gondor are forming up over here. There's a lot of fire arrows being traded back and forth between the two sides here. Now the frame rate should improve as the unit count falls as the battle goes along. Just fire arrows being traded. Citadel Guard and Fountain Guard forming up the front line. Now that is a very scary front line, and now the cavalry is coming forward, and they do see a pretty decent opportunity. The Dunedain Commanders and the Tharbad Riders charging forth. Let's just turn the speed down a little bit. Now Dunedain Commanders are obviously going to lay a real hurting down on civilians that they've charged from the front. But they need to be careful because there are Tarnostian Guard here, and there are also a decent amount of Doran Ernil pikemen as well. Now the Tharbad Riders are also charging forward, but the civilians being used as a pretty effective buffer thus far to deal with that. Fire arrows continuing to move. Now let's have a look at how Dol Amroth are going to try and hold back the tide of Arthedain forces. And Arthedain is doing the right thing here. Dol Amroth is outnumbered, but the troops they have here are of decent quality. The Athlon Halberdiers in particular could be a danger to Arthedain's standard unit, so Arthedain is going to try and completely overwhelm Dol Amroth's forces, which should work provided they start to push with their spears, because they would not be able to hold back that much mass Dol Amroth. And I think Dol Amroth realises the peril they're in, because they're already committing the Haven Guard and some Black Swan Vanguard, which is going to be a tough nut to crack. And honestly, if Arthedain don't play this smartly, Dol Amroth could get some decent value off Arthedain here, and then Lothlorien would be denied any reinforcements, although interestingly enough, it would appear that one of the armies is moving to the aid of Dol Amroth's ground forces, and that's mostly Rudar by looks of things, in fact entirely Rudar, so Rohan and Lothlorien are going to have a bit of a 1v1, while the chaos happens within the mountain pass itself. So let's move back up to 1 speed and watch as my frames disappear. So we can see Dol Amroth actually taking up a pretty decent position here. They've managed to sort of hold up a pretty decent choke point here, although these Ethelon's units need to get behind the pikes at this point. Now, Cardland could attack from over here, but I don't think they're going to do that. They've only got one unit of spears, and, well, there are the Gwathlo trackers as well. This is risky from Dol Amroth. They have taken quite a lot of risk upon themselves here in the red team's strategy, because if they can't hold both down here and up high where their trebuchet is located, then a lot of resources will be lost for the red team. And here we can see the cycle charging is continuing from the Cardland cavalry. Tharbad riders and the Dunedain commanders continuing to charge into the Dol Amroth forces, which overextended themselves. They perhaps should have led the way with the spears and the pikes rather than sending their archers in. I mean, the civilians are a throwaway unit, that's fine, but Gondor not being quite as aggressive as I thought they'd be. I thought they'd be thundering through that breach, especially once they noticed a few shots from the trebuchet, but they have managed to calm things down. Ooh. Very nice hit there from the trebuchet. A bit of friendly fire, but most of that is going to be Arthedain's forces, and already the Evandin spearmen not really loving life at this point, and with dismounted Knights of Anumanas coming in as well, and now the Belfast Marines coming to try and reinforce, but it doesn't look like Dol Amroth are going to be able to hold this position for much longer. It was an interesting idea, and they have managed to get at least some value off the trebuchet. It wasn't a complete loss, and Arthedain's forces are going to be somewhat depleted, but they do need to hope that Rohan is able to capitalise on this by defeating Lothlorien. Now they have the Helmingas and the Riddermark archers trying to skirmish with Lothlorien. Be interesting to see how this works. Frishjuice moving his forces around. Now I think he will be extremely pleased that it's only Rohan he's fighting and not Rohan and Rudaur. There's also a Rohan force which doesn't have an abundance of cavalry, which in this situation I think would have been devastating for the elves. So Lothlorien's probably feeling pretty good about their chances here, honestly, with their skirmish power and their individually stronger infantry units. So far, things are looking pretty decent for the blue team. They've had the better of the early engagements here. Once again, let's turn down the speed just a little bit. Now, the Black Swan Vanguard are a big factor here. Their AP is making it very difficult for Arthedain to get a purchase off, and in fact, they've managed to kill an awful lot of these forces. Now the Belfast Marines still firing. The trebuchet is still very much active as well. And Arthedain is largely bottled up as a result of this, because they need all of these resources to take out this strong point of Dol Amroth's forces. They need to get rid of that trebuchet, because at this point the trebuchet has turned back around and is continuing to fight. You can see that cavalry is still cycle charging on that very thin Dol Amroth front line. I'm surprised actually that the blue team is not trying to push home their advantage, because Mordor is stalling their advance a little bit here. They're not getting up in support of Dol Amroth as quickly as they probably need to, because if Mordor comes forward, their numbers advantage here on the front line is going to disappear pretty quickly. Let's go back up to 1 speed. What are you aiming at? You're definitely aiming at Cardland's forces, aiming at those Minas Tirithlin's spearmen. And at this point the trebuchet has done pretty well for itself. It is very expensive though, so we'll see if it's paid for itself at the end. Gwathlo trackers, the bargain basement alternative to rangers that Cardland have, but they're firing relatively unopposed here, and this poor expeditionary force of Dol Amroth here in this valley is being made to shoulder the burden of all of these casualties. You can see that Rudaur and Mordor are waiting menacingly in the background, and all of those numbers eventually will crash down upon Gondor and Cardland. At which point, if they don't have much in the way of archers left, they could be in a little bit of trouble. Dol Amroth again. How well they do could well decide this fight in many ways. Nasty hit there on the Merc cavalry. That is a lot of Rudaur forces. Now what's going on over here? It looks like we have the fight beginning. Rohan colliding with the elves, although Westmark infantry is good. A frontline troop for Rohan, but they don't stand a chance against these heavy elven swordsmen, Sindar Blade Masters and the Lothlorien Sword Masters. Westmark Marshals, their AP isn't going to help them too much against Lothlorien either. They will fare slightly better than stuff like the Spearmen here, but even so, I don't think Rohan has quite the correct army to deal with this situation. Some of the elven skirmishers are starting to take quite a lot of condensed fire, but they should be able to deal with that. And yeah, all of this Rohan infantry is really starting to struggle.
They have lost half their men.
And yeah, Rohan's advance here. They tried to smash through individual sections of the line, I think, but unfortunately that's playing into Lothlorien's hands a little bit. If you narrow the engagement for the elves, you're always going to be in a really tight spot, especially against Lothlorien, who are capable of dealing out extremely high amounts of damage very quickly, probably the most of any elves. in pure melee terms. Especially when you consider that they're one of the, well, the Lothlorien warriors are one of the very few pure AP units that the elves can field as in totality. Galathrun riders falling back, Lothlorien archers. Where's that Rohan cavalry? The first marshal's bodyguard falling away. The Eowyn shield maidens. Now in the background we still have the Hornburg sentries, the Meduzald guard and the Sons of Yule. I mean, honestly, if I were them at this point I would run. And I would try and group up with Rhudaur and Mordor, because at this point it's only a matter of time before Lothlorien absolutely eviscerate Rohan's front line. First marshal's bodyguard charging in, but they don't stand much of a chance here. The Galathrun riders are very adept in melee as well, and the first marshal's bodyguard are only lancers. His Eowyn shield maidens are getting some decent volleys off, however, inflicting as many casualties as they can, but this has not gone well for Rohan. What is going on over here then? Wathlo trackers. What happened to Rhudaur's army? Rhudaur's army has sort of fallen back in here. The catapult's moving forward as well. Granadine Rangers up there as well. Some nice body piercing. Now this might be an interesting gambit. Simply because, well, there are some Mordor archers moving forward now as well to skirmish and hopefully to... I think what they intend to do is to exhaust the arrow supplies of Gondor and Cardlan. Easier said than done.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Indeed, but perhaps what they want is Dol Amroth throwing themselves under the bus and sort of giving the onus on Cardlan and Gondor to try and attack into this very strong defensive position that Mordor and Rhudaur now occupy. Now, falling asleep a little bit because this catapult was left wide open for the Tharbad riders. Now, the catapult probably won't die from this, and the Tharbad riders will almost certainly break here. Cardlan in general, a little bit... Well, that's Dol Amroth's general, certainly. That mass of Arthedain troops up here on the cliffside. And these Arthedain sergeants got in behind as well, so this is going to be the end of Dol Amroth, but they put up a pretty decent fight up here, to be fair, considering the resources they had up here. It was always going to be a risk, and the Blackroot Vale archers have also been discovered and are being slain by the Fornost Array Knights. It's less of a night battle, I suppose, and more of a dawn battle. But yeah, this is the end for Dol Amroth, and down in the valley as well, it's not looking like Dol Amroth have an awful lot left either. Speaking of factions which don't have an awful lot left, there is Rohan as well. Now the Sons of Yule are coming forward, a nice charge as well into the Galathrun nobles. Probably won't be enough to finish them off, and they might take some residual casualties from the Javelins and the Axemen. Those Galathrun nobles. Very, very powerful unit. Charging into the back of those Sylvan Spears. I mean, these Sons of Yule are causing a bit of havoc. Lothlorien certainly won't be healthy, or at least as healthy as they would have hoped coming out of this, but this is still going to be a victory for the blue team, which does mean that they will have another angle of attack potentially, and they'll be able to follow the same road that Rhudaur took. So it is going to come down to how well Mordor and Rhudaur can defend, two factions which often are a little bit more comfortable when they're being aggressive. But it will be interesting, because Cardlan and Gondor presumably won't have all that much in terms of arrows left. Arthedain as well. Time will tell how much damage they've taken. Lothlorien's not going to be in prime condition either, so essentially it's going to be 4 damaged armies, or at least 4 somewhat depleted armies against 2 almost completely healthy ones. At least that's what I'm seeing so far. Rohan's still doing their best to inflict as many casualties as they can. What is going on here? And indeed this is where Mordor is starting to pull back. Dol Amroth, however, not having a bit of it, is going to sort of make a bit of a last stand up here in this section, fighting back to back. Dol Amroth has really been a nuisance to the blue team so far, but I'm not entirely convinced whether or not this is going to be a winning strategy come the end of the fight. We're approaching the end of the first 10,000 frames, so let's have a look at the percentage of kills. And indeed the blue team are ahead, but only by 4%, so despite the fact that Dol Amroth's taken a real beating, it does show the merits potentially of keeping some completely fresh armies. Now here come the Minas Tirith Spearmen, charging into the Doran Ernil Pikemen, Tarnostian Guard. So a real wet noodle fight here between the low attack Spearmen. However, the Pikes should do a decent job of holding this front line up a little bit longer than it otherwise would. And these Axemen, because of their very low armour and defence values, they will actually fall in significant quantities to Pikemen. But if their AP starts to bite in on this Dol Amroth infantry, they could be in real trouble. Cheap axemen are a very good way of getting value off against the kingdoms of men. At least the good kingdoms of men. Not so much for Harad, who tend to go into battle shirtless. And yeah, this is where the Dol Amroth forces are starting to break in places. Cracks are beginning to show. There's still some Black Swans alive, but this might be the end. There are still some civilians down here, but the Merc cavalry, you'd imagine, is probably going to be sufficient to wipe these final dregs of the Dol Amroth army away. It is interesting how Gondor and Cardlan and then Rhudaur and Mordor on the other side have had the same sort of idea here, where they've both grouped up in defensive positions. Dol Amroth was really the wild card here, and time will tell whether Dol Amroth's sacrifice will pay dividends. I'm not sure whether Dol Amroth's allies really helped them as much as they should. As soon as Mordor and Rhudaur arrived on the scene, if this was the plan all along, they maybe should have been a little bit more snappy about it, because Gondor clearly wanted to adopt a more defensive stance, but we'll see. It could pay off in the end. And Lothlorien has just about sent Rohan packing entirely. They still have the Medusald Guard and the Hornburg Sentries, but Hornburg Sentries, you know, an AP focused unit primarily, that's their major strength anyway. Probably not going to be the best thing against the elves, particularly not when the elves outnumber them that much, so a LMAOO is maybe not going to have the easiest ride. The Medusald Guard could well be an important unit as time goes on, however, and now it looks as though they are going to try and, well, I mean, I'd definitely try and get them out of there. These are two units which could be really important to a Mordor Rhudaur last stand. Sons of Yore are also running for the hills, potentially trying to get into the trees so they can hide, but if that's the general's unit, they can't hide. The Medusald Guard are being targeted by the archers, which was always going to happen. They're such a deadly unit, both in melee and with their javelins, so if you can whittle them down from afar, and in this situation, of course, Lothlorien certainly have the ability to do that. Cardlan. Wonder what Arthedain's going to do with the rest of their forces. There's still a lot of blue up on the higher part of the mountain there. But Dol Amroth are actually holding their own here. Probably not for much longer. The Citadel Guard are going to be enough, I think, to help tilt this fight in the other direction, and perhaps more significantly, there is going to be some rear charges from cavalry. There are pikes, so the cavalry will take losses, but at this point the Merc cavalry is probably not going to be the most important tool, so you can throw them under the bus for a good enough purpose, and finishing off what's left of Dol Amroth would certainly count as that. But things are starting to quieten down now, so we're going to have a little bit of a lull in proceedings. Gondor's catapults and the fact there's a lot of reserves here, including the Wardens of Tirn Gorthar. What's going on with Arthedain's forces? The cavalry is marching away. I mean, this surely can't be all they have left, right? The cavalry is moving away. Maybe they're just sort of leaving this just in case things start to go south and they need to retreat. Arthedain maybe being a little bit too cautious here. These Evandin spearmen are not really needed over here anymore. Rohan is all but finished at the hands of Lothlorien. Although to be fair to Rohan, as we go and have a look over here, I mean, Lothlorien don't exactly have the biggest army left. Still, again, even smaller elven units, even of a size like this, are still going to be potentially genuine problem, especially some of the elite archers like the Sindar archers, so it's nothing to be sniffed at. But even so, the Medusald Guard could yet inflict more of a heavy toll, so it was more of an even fight than I was giving Rohan credit for. But ultimately I do still think that Lothlorien are going to have the better of this fight. But even so, not a significant win or loss either way with regards to how the whole battle is going to turn out. I'm a little bit surprised that both units of Citadel Guard haven't been committed forward. This is just allowing Dol Amroth to hold on that little bit longer, get a few extra kills. Meanwhile, Carandros Swordmasters under a bit of arrow fire there from the Dora and Ernil. What's going on down there? Moran on guard. Mordor sending forward a unit of spears, presumably to try and prevent Cardlan from rear charging Dol Amroth's very bold front line that they've formed. But at this point, I am curious to see how that's going to work out for Mordor and Rhudaur, because they certainly have sort of pitched their tent over in that valley over there. And the onus will be on the blue team to attack them at this point, because they are still ahead, I believe. Indeed they are. They pulled a little bit further ahead, with Dol Amroth starting to fall by the wayside and Rohan following them. That's a lot of infantry that Mordor have, and potentially with the right units from Rudauer, stuff like the Franadine Berserkers and Rangers, things could be pretty messy on the approach for the attackers, but I think they have enough in the locker to do it. I mean, there are these cavalry units. Again, Arthedain's investment in cavalry probably won't pay off here because there's only one avenue of attack and it is a very nasty looking one. Let's just have a quick skim over at what they've got over here. They have a ballista, Rudauer brought a ballista, which is going to potentially be pretty useful. They can snipe out the Gondor catapult if it gets too close, some Rudauer marksmen, a lot of archers of course, basic archers including the rangers which we saw earlier, but several lines of defence thick, so it will be interesting to see how the forces of evil, as they now are, go about this. Lothlorien swordsman. Meduseld Guard, I mean, the Swordmasters would probably lose 1-to-1 with the Meduseld Guard when they've been battered up this badly. Multiple HP, very good attack on them as well with their axe and shield combination. But ultimately the Meduseld Guard are not going to have the numbers to really mount a truly successful stand. Although having said that, they do still have the Sons of Yorl, and 12 Knights is nothing to be sniffed at. The Maethit Ilazgelen are certainly the tool most likely to bring them down. I think the Sons of Yorl are going to start to fall away if they stay in melee too long with these spears, however. Almost certainly their hit points have been heavily depleted over the course of an elongated fight with Lothlorien. And indeed there are only 7 of them left, but still more damage. Lothlorien are in a pretty sorry state, all things considered. And Lothlorien are not, all of the elves in general really, except situationally and Ladris, are not going to be the best at charging into a heavily skirmish defended choke point. We'll see. I'm amazed that Dol Amroth is still digging in, to be honest. I'm amazed that the Blues have not finished them off sooner. Because all the while that they're still alive and fighting, that's extra kills and extra manpower that you're bleeding away. So, a lot of credit goes to Master Blaster here for making the best of a pretty ropey situation. He had to hold this valley with limited resources, and he had to defend his trebuchet when he was rumbled by Arthedain. Very risky indeed. I'm not sure the trebuchet fully paid for the 1300 florins it costs, but at least it wasn't a complete wash. Dunedain commanders. This Cardinal cavalry's done pretty well for itself as well, though. Dol Amroth has certainly felt its presence as the fight has gone along. Even so, we are now past the halfway point. Again, let's have a look at the percentages. Again, the Blues are pulling a little bit further ahead, but this will close again because Mordor and Rudauer are certainly not going to move from this spot. Indeed, they shouldn't. But there goes Dol Amroth, I believe. Indeed, they do. So actually, Rohan lasted longer than Dol Amroth in the end, which is impressive in its own way. The Meduseld Guard fighting back to back. They're probably a unit that's got locked morale, to be fair. But Lothlorien finishing them off. That's going to be pretty much the end of Rohan. We do still have a unit over here. There's one Son of Yorl, and of course it's the General, I believe. I think this is the General's model that they replaced Rohan's General with. It is of course Theoden, because we've only had one General death so far. What's that up there? Arthedain? I think Arthedain are going to be moving their infantry down to support Lothlorien, but it doesn't really matter how they approach this. They can't go round that way. So it's a frontal assault or nothing. And this is a pretty intimidating defence, although when you do look at it, it is propped up by numbers primarily rather than quality. You have to imagine that all of these orcs and the lower tier of Rudauer's infantry will start to struggle when all is said and done. I mean, look at that. You can see the huge force of Cardlan and Gondor moving forward. Franadine Rangers up on the hill, a very important tool. You can't afford to use their ammunition lightly at this point in the battle. Body piercing, of course. The Dunedain Rangers from Cardlan potentially still have their ammunition as well. Ramas Ekor garrison archers already taking fire. Probably not the best use of the Rangers' ammunition, to be fair, but nonetheless. Indeed, I think with their swords out, this is a pretty horrendous waste. Well, there goes Rohan. Finally, Lothlorien finishes them off. So, who is going to be first into the breach? Looks like Cardlin. They're going to send forward 2 units of civilians, very much like Dol Amroth here, matching up with the civilian cannon fodder. Then, I mean, Gondor has brought some interesting units here. The Gondorian phalanx of the Fountain Guard, Guards of Osgiliath and Citadel Guard is a pretty terrifying prospect, but only one of those units is shielded, so it probably won't do too well against all of those arrows coming in. There is also that catapult as well, which can scarcely miss when all of these forces are moving forward. There's the catapult. Now this, of course, is the moment when the ballista needs to snipe out that Gondor catapult, to be fair, because the Gondorian catapult, if it gets some good hits onto the Rudauer and Mordor infantry, this battle could be a foregone conclusion as the final assault is being prepared. A lot of arrows raining down on these forces as they move forwards. Well, that was certainly a ballista shot. So Rudauer certainly has the right idea, and at this point Gondor can't get this catapult out of here. Artillery reacts so slowly to this sort of thing, with the exception of the Troll catapult. That was a very nice hit on that Citadel Guard here. I mean, at this point with the catapult pressure, you probably need to get as close as possible. You don't want to give the, at this point, defending team's catapult free value of, especially not into stuff like Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard. All of that AP could be very, very useful at dealing with the Mordor regular infantry. Less so with Rudauer, of course, but still, every hit claims at least some lives, even if those are lives of civilians. There's still a lot of blue triangles heading down this way, however. Lothlorien don't have much left, but Arthedain, you know, still have a decent amount left. All they've really dealt with is half of Dol Amroth's army. Time will tell how well Gondor and Cardlin can weather this storm. Cardlin's morale could come into effect here. Mordor do have the potential to fear out an army with low morale like Cardlin or other orcs. I think, yeah, this is a catapult. They do have some Olag High as well. Olag High could really do some damage in this sort of situation. Mordor catapult continues to fire, getting more and more kills. Again, a lot of it is on lesser units though. And again, the Fountain Guard I think is now being targeted by the Rudauer firing squad up there, which is good to see. And now we have the beginnings of this fight down here. The Greenwatch Garrison archers that are out of ammo and the Minas Tirith spearmen leading the way with the civilians, colliding with the Morannon Guard, and now the Morannon heavy maulers. And heavy maulers will do very well in this situation. Both Cardlin and Gondor pack on the armour values to really pad their defence. So the AP of both Rudauer and Mordor in this situation should stand them in pretty good stead. And even when Arthedain arrives on the scene, that will still be the case. But I'm not sure whether they have enough nibble. A lot of forces, I mean, they've got some good units as well. Ranadine Berserkers are no joke. They do need to keep this line strong. At this point, the defenders have kind of, if they allowed this sort of bottleneck to fall, I think things could start to fall apart. Generally speaking, the organisation tends to go to shit when your first line breaks and the attackers pour forwards. Although this isn't great for Cardlin. It says victory seems certain, but now that standard Morannon infantry is getting in here, to be fair, this Morannon Guard is breaking, and there are only Dunman spearmen here. I mean, I think Rudauer and Mordor are being a little bit overcautious. They need to just commit forward units and send forward their infantry in waves, and it's going to come down to their ranged units and how wisely they're using them. But unfortunately, I think Rudauer, they're sort of ballooning their arrows up into the air and sending them down randomly into the front line, which is probably getting some friendly fire in addition to killing the first wave of troops. And the creme de la creme of the Cardlin and Gondor forces is not going to be sent forward in the first wave, let's be honest. Oh, these Minas Tirith and sharpshooters over here though, this force of crossbows could be a bit of a problem. Morannon archers immediately trying to skirmish with them. So Gondor still have those forces, targeting the Fountain Guard. Here comes Lothlorien as well. Morannon infantry trying their best, they are now digging in. However, we now have the Wardens of Tir Gorthad on the front line. Their inspiration should keep the lower tier Cardland forces in line here and keep them fighting for as long as possible. More forces are being committed forward. Moran on halberds, this is definitely the sort of thing they need on the front line. Those AP polearms are going to be very important. Cardland are sending forward their heavy hitters now though. They've got the Tharbad Warhammers coming in, and those multiple HP AP shock units are going to be really nasty on the front line. Most of Mordor's general forces are not going to be able to withstand them. In fact, even though Rudar aren't that heavily armoured, their lower tier forces are not going to stand a chance against a unit like Tharbad Warhammers. Dunedain Rangers are here as well. I mean, it's hard to see how the red team can dig their way out of this hole. I did see the Thranduil Berserkers throw their axes in over here. So they're trying their best, and they will be a very strong unit in the melee as well. They don't have much ammo, but those axes fly in. Around on a halberds, moving forward to try and help reinforce the line, and the AP will be very welcome, as previously said. Having a look at these reserves: Marines, Guards of Osgiliath, Cavalry. I mean, to be fair, they have committed forward quite a lot. Cardland have really front-loaded here, but they can afford to, really, with how many reinforcements Arthedain brings to the party. But it is possible that all of this cavalry might work against them, seeing as how much of their force is still cavalry. Let's have a look at the percentages, and it has shrunk. So they are still winning, the blue team, but only by 4% now, and not the 10% that it once was. Rudar clansmen trying to help reinforce the front line. Again, a very low attack. I think they might only have one attack. Or two attack. It's very low. It's lower than most spearmen even, but they are pretty good defensively. Good shield value. Healthy amount of men per unit as well. Some Dunedain peacekeepers in the back over there. As soon as this line cracks, that would be the signal for Arthedain and Cardland and Gondor, actually, if they've still got their Pinneth Gelling cavalry, indeed they do, to just pour in through a breach. A lot of the Cardland low tier units are trying to run away at this point. Civilians are being committed though to plug the breach, which is good. Rudar Axeman as well, so that's more AP. More Moran on infantry being committed as well. It is a real mess here on this front line. And it could still go either way. Again, a bit of wasteful play from the skirmishers of the red team here could come back to bite them here, because their front line has obviously done very well against the first wave here. Primarily comprised of Cardland's forces, backed up by Gondor now with Axeman of Lasarnak and what was left of their infantry. Arthedain is also getting onto the front line now, but again, their force is a lot of spears, which is not really going to help them in this situation. Their anti-infantry malice and their very low attack score of 3 is not really what you need when you're going up against units with really high attack like the Rudar Axeman. A lot of value is probably being achieved by General WVPM's basic axes. Gondor is going to meet them in kind, however, with the Axeman of Lasarnak. Axe to axe. Not really a graceful duel, but brutal and bloody. Dismounted Knights of Annúminas and Dunedain Peacekeepers, so more and more now you can see more elite. So a little bit of a crash there, but it's fine. I've timed it just so that we can see the Dunedain Peacekeepers and the Dismounted Knights of Annúminas go in. So I'm just going to observe from on high while the mass of troops continues to push against each other. This is actually a good view to look at for now, because obviously you can see the line. You can see it bow a little bit there in favour of the attackers, but everywhere else the defenders have got a pretty thick line, honestly. And looking back here at some of the reserves that the... well, I'm calling them the attackers now because that's what it's kind of turned into, a bit of a valley defence, a 300 situation here. A lot of these troops that are in reserve, very, very strong, but not very numerous, so it'll be interesting to see if the quantity-based defence can hold out, because obviously units like the Rudar clans, and you can see defeat seems certain, very low in terms of their attack scores, but they do have stuff like the Thranduil Pikemen, a fantastic basis around which to put some of the scarier units. You can see the Thranduil Berserkers are still back there. They have released their payload now, and they still act as very strong troops in melee, of course. The Ballista, I think the Ballista is still firing missiles, but opportunities for the Rudar Ballista are going to be few and far between. They're just trying to snipe out units of individual significance, I think, which is fine at this point. I've also turned down the graphics a little bit in this situation just so that I don't have to deal with another crash at this point. We are well within the final 10,000 frames, of course. Just if I just have a look there, so we are now within the final 6,000 frames even. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops. We can see Mercenary War Chiefs are being committed further forwards, of course. Swordsmen, which, strangely enough for Rudar, you know, one of their few non-AP units, but they should be able to hold their own against some of the more highly skillful units that are being thrown at them. Admittedly, most of the elves are already gone, so AP is probably what you want more than anything else. The cavalry is just sort of piling into the middle. I think this is a terrible mistake because the Thranodine pikemen have now been committed forward to the front line. There are Morannon halberds also laced throughout the front line.
Only half the enemy force
Let's just have a look from on high over here. So the cavalry isn't really going to make any difference. And I assume what they're trying to do with the cavalry here is to push through with their mass. But if they were going to do that, they needed to really do it from the off or keep it in reserve and wait, because even if the blue team loses this frontline battle, the attackers could then spill forwards, and that's when gaps could appear. Now that's Cardlin. So Cardlin's general has fallen, and the morale shock for that could be somewhat significant. A lot of this cavalry is routing, of course, mercenary cavalry as well. So yeah, the blue team's cavalry, early on, Cardlin's cav did very well for itself, and Arthedane's also helped to defuse Dolan Roth's advanced position on the cliff, but at this point it was always going to be difficult to make it work in this situation where it's a very one front kind of battle and there's no way around other than straight through. Using cavalry in this situation requires a Midas touch. Dunedain Rangers have been firing all this time, so potentially that could come into play. Arthedane Marksman, you can't imagine this Merc cavalry is going to last too much longer in a situation like this. Dismounted Knights of Illuminus, however. Mercenary War Chiefs' victory seems certain when they're in close proximity with Dismounted Knights of Illuminus. Goes to show how well the defensive line is actually doing, and I think the blue team is kind of running out of troops to send in here, which it might be a situation where they should now think about forming a bit of a crescent moon over here and maybe looking to exploit some of the gaps as the red team potentially counterattacks. The red team still have some reserves back here. They've got some Morannon halberds are blocking them here. They've got archers, but again, all of these units which can be thrown in, the Thranodine Berserkers as well, are a very legitimate infantry unit indeed. The Olag High have now been committed as well, which is undoubtedly causing havoc in the attacking lines. You can actually see there, Ramasek or Garrison archers immediately routing under the weight of the Olag High. And the Olag High are also going to be exactly the sort of thing needed to help thin out the ranks of these dismounted Knights of Illuminas, otherwise they would have been a tough nut to crack. The Temple Executioners are also in there as well, 49 of them. And 1v1, I don't think the blue team have got anything left which could deal with them, other than maybe the Fountain Guard, provided they got a front-on engagement, but the red team would certainly not allow that to happen. More forces are being committed forward from Exlop here, however, Axemen of Lasana. Let's have a look. And still, the blue team are ahead in terms of the percentages, but in terms of the melee forces they have left, you do worry for them, especially seeing as some of their forces are starting to break off. Low-tier units, yes, but these are important men that they've got on the front line, an important meat shield. As soon as they lose that, especially with these Olag High just absolutely wrecking lives over here. They're getting into the Axemen of Lasana now, inflicting huge casualties, and actually thinning out the ranks of the blue team at this point is probably one of the best things the red team can do. Because from a quality standpoint, you have to imagine stuff like the Temple Executioners and Thranodine Berserkers are going to be able to fairly comfortably deal with anything that the blue team have left. Some Arthedain Marksman there. The Ballista actually still has ammunition as well, so it's been slowly but surely picking away at the reserve forces, and they are going for the Fountain Guard. Certainly, in my opinion, the strongest, or at least most dangerous unit that the blue team have left. Some Kerandrel Sword Masters being committed forward. They could be very, very important indeed. Let's not get too close lest it crash again. Not that we'll be able to tell much from what's going on there because of all the dead bodies anyway. Thranodine Berserkers being committed to the front line as well. More AP, more pain coming for the blue team. Is this tactic in the end going to pay off? They do still have 2 units of Morannon halberds that they've got in reserve. It looks as though they're going to be mobilised now as well. So it's going to be now or never for the red team, and we are into the final 3,000 frames. So this is it. This is crunch time. 5% difference, so the red team are pulling it back, but I'm not convinced it's going to be quick enough. And this Olag High is still just going crazy in the back lines here. trying to deal with the reserve forces, which again is understandable. Pikes are going to be weak to this sort of thing. But the cavalry could be enough to finish them off. Rudauer marksmen, of course. This is one of the few situations in which their hugely inflated ammo supply is going to come into play, because they're still firing away. So being a little bit more wasteful with Rudauer's arrows, maybe a little bit less felt here because of their additional arrows. Halberds moving in, again, that's yet more armor piercing. Really none of the forces that are left for the Blues are going to enjoy facing off against armor piercing troops. Ranadine Berserkers, although to be fair, I think the Kerandor Swordmasters with their heightened skill should be able to see off the Ranadine Berserkers, albeit not without taking some substantial losses themselves. Dunedain Commanders sweeping in there. Some heavy maulers, presumably that have come back from routing, and again, every soldier is needed for the front line at this point. Dunedain Commanders, they've been running around for a long time in this battle, and we can now see that Arthedain, this could potentially be their moment to shine with the Royal Court of House Amlaith. Multiple HP Lancers, because if you see here, the Dunedain Commanders have got the right idea. They're getting in and around now.
If we continue like this, we will smash the
Not the best charge. They should continue going around and get into the archers. There goes the Rudauer General, the Fountain Guard, proving their mettle. I think this is going to be the end for the red team. I think you can see that a lot of their forces are starting to waver. A lot of them are becoming tired. There are still some Lothlorien forces down in that corner as well. And when defeat seems certain for the Temple Executioners, you know you're in a bit of a tight spot. So I think the blue team can count their lucky stars that they've managed to just about ration their forces out appropriately, I think. I think at this point, you can see now that the blue team's advantage is starting to grow again, but it was looking dicey for a moment there, and I think that if Rudauer and Mordor had more, especially with stuff like the Ranadine Rangers and the Rudauer Marksmen, if they had picked their targets more wisely, utilised their ammunition more effectively, they could have won this fairly easily. I mean, the Rangers up here shooting along the line here, rather than just sort of ineffectually shooting out here into the initial volleys. I mean, I assume they did change their targets eventually, but every Ranger volley is a precious thing.
The battle is very much in our favour. Victory will be ours.
Gondor's Pinneth Gelling cavalry managing to get a rear charge there. Yeah, and this is going to be a victory for the blue team now, with cavalry running around the back lines, the archer line, what remained of Mordor's archer line, falling away. So yeah, very good battle, back and forth. Didn't go as I thought it would. I thought Lothlorien would be ganged up upon by Rudauer and Rohan, but it turned out not to be the case. And Rohan put up a better fight in that situation than I thought they would, but they ultimately did still lose. Dol Amroth, with their very strange deployment, made the best out of it, and ultimately Mordor and Rudauer's plan could have worked, but the execution was a little bit off, and I think the blue team honestly did what they had to do without being too spectacular. I think Cardlan and Gondor worked well in tandem with one another. Arthedain did decently. They did what they had to do against Dol Amroth, and then they formed quite a lot of the cannon fodder, which was necessary in order to try and break through this this valley defence over here. Yeah, this is going to be the end. Cavalry just sort of chasing down the archers. I imagine that the Temple Executioners are probably still in that mess. I think that was the Lothlorien General falling right at the death here. But Arthedain and Gondor can keep hold of their generals, I believe, which is good. Some forces that are returning as well, the dregs. And there goes Mordor's general. The hands of the pikes and the out of ammunition javelins. So I hope that YouTube doesn't butcher the lighting and the quality of this with its compression too much, because a night or a dawn battle, as this might be called, because of the level of brightness, is a rare enough thing.
Our soldiers have fought and died well today.
And there we go. So Cardlan getting the most kills, maybe not too surprising, because they probably did the vast majority of the damage to Mordor and Rudauer, and both of them, of course, had by far and away the largest armies on the field. Lothlorien and Rohan going for a sort of lower numbers battle, which Lothlorien ultimately came out on top of, and obviously they got more kills as a result of having an army left to assault the final position as well, whereas Mordor were defeated fully. Mordor and Rudauer doing very well in that final defence, though, inflicting a lot of casualties onto all of the remaining blue team armies there. I think Dol Amroth were dealt a pretty rough hand, but I think they, Master Blaster must have known it was very risky to put their trebuchet separate to the rest of their army, because Arthedain did what they had to in that situation. They completely overwhelmed Dol Amroth's defenders eventually. Took some casualties of their own, of course, but ultimately won through. Yeah, all around pretty good. So Cardlin, actually, the highest amount of kills on the field is the one we will be able to see. Yeah, a lot of kills on the Dunedain Rangers there, but the Dunedain Commanders, this was a very effective unit, harrying the initial Dol Amroth lines, and they were still alive in the late game as well to get in and around the defensive position. Eventually, 394 kills on a unit of Lancers, single HP Lancers as well, so that's a good return. The crossbows getting a good amount of kills, as you would expect. Wardens of Tirn Gorthab, maybe not so much. Gwathlo Trackers did okay for themselves as well. And 205 on the Tharbad Warhammer, so they did very well for themselves in and amongst all that mess. The civilians, of course, not doing quite so well when faced with a Orc Halberd line. But yes, I hope you enjoyed this battle. It's not often that I get to do a night battle, I think. I mean, it's fine on my screen. Obviously, graphically, it could be a little better because the brightness is skewed a little bit. But it should be at least watchable on YouTube, which is what I'm hoping for. The last night battle I did was a bit of a disaster with regards to how visible it actually was. So yeah, I hope that this one will be good, because it was an interesting battle to behold. Big thank you to Lucky Hussar for sending this one in. The next one I do have a few that I can choose from. I'm not entirely sure what it will be. Top 10's a little bit up in the air at the moment, but I will get back to you on that relatively soon. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.